this, and let me check to make sure with my friends back in the control room. Do we have both our guests? Good to know. I thought I heard something, but it must have been a false alarm in my ear. So pleased to welcome in two folks who can talk more about what is transpiring in the House and what is transpiring in different gubernatorial races around the country. First, waiting patiently from Washington, D.C., why, it's Katie Prill of the National Republican Campaign Committee, and checking in via phone from St. Petersburg, Florida, it's Matt Towery from Insider's Advantage. To you both, we thank you for your time and welcome now to America's Forum.
Nice to be with you.
Okay, Matt, let's start with Florida. This is a race that a whole lot of people are looking at because they think it's kind of a vengeance battle, a grudge match. What do you make of this matchup now?
Well, you know, St. Pete is a bit of a ground zero for Charlie Crist because this is where he lives. He of course, also lives on the other side of the state and then claims another place that he lives, but he's seen most often here, and so he's known very well. This is going to be, as truly, as you said, a grudge match beyond measure. Governor Scott has put a massive amount of money on TV going back into early spring. March and April, there were commercials on talking about what a terrible governor Charlie Crist was when he was in office. Now Crist is coming back with his own ads. And ironically, I was speaking with numerous folks in St. Pete who sort of are ambivalent about the entire race. And they said they're getting so confused because they're attacking one another's times as governor, but the attacks they have are basically the same sort of attacks. So they can't decide which governor was the failed governor.
So with that in mind, Matt, would it behoove Governor Scott to come out with, look, here are the number of jobs we created, here's how things are looking up in Florida, instead of continuing with the, hey, you got to define Charlie Crist, if in the voters' minds there is no distinction nor difference given the nature of the attack ads?
Well, J.D., here's what it really comes down to in this state. If you talk to people who actually live here, it's sort of a general balancing act of things you wouldn't expect. On one side, a lot of voters, independent, moderate voters, let's say moderate conservative voters, whatever, who line that I-4 corridor, that famed corridor that we talk about that runs from Orlando all the way down to Tampa, St. Pete, through Tampa and St. Pete. That's sort of the decision maker in this state. People who live there tell me this. They say they don't think Governor Scott's a very nice man. They don't have good feelings about him, but they don't believe that Charlie Crist believes in anything. So it's like balancing between a sort of a guy who will say anything to get elected, that being Charlie Crist, and a guy who they think is really sort of a little bit mean, who wants to stay there. And it's more a personality contest than it is anything else. And I think it's really going to come down in the end as to who can push their voters out and who can convince this small sliver of voters who are undecided which person is more likable. It's a likability campaign down here as much as it is anything else. Now, that said, very quickly, Scott's leading in the polls more recently. He's ticked up. For a long time, Crist was leading. And the second thing we can say about this is that this race, as it begins to tighten, it looks like Crist might not be able to pull off what he was going to a year ago. So I think Scott has a little bit of an edge at the moment.
Well, we will keep it right there on the Florida gubernatorial race. Let me turn to Katie Prill, who has been waiting so patiently there from Washington, D.C. And let's go out to the Grand Canyon state, the state I represented in Congress for a dozen years, taking a look at some Democrat incumbents who face a couple of key battles. Give us the take on the victors last night in the Republican congressional primaries there, Katie.
Yeah, we have a great lineup of Republicans running this fall. I think the one thing we know about the three Democrat incumbents that we're targeting is none of them fit their district. They all support Obamacare. We have Kirsten Sinema in the 9th District. She actually toured the state of Arizona promoting Obamacare before it became law. We also have Ron Barber. He was the one that supported and touted the Medicare cuts that Obamacare made. So I think we have a one theme here in Arizona, that we have three incumbents that don't fit their district, and we have great Republicans running this fall. They're going to really hold them accountable and give the voters a clear alternative and someone to vote for.
Katie, as you mentioned the specter of Obamacare, I want to return to the congressional column in just a second, but this this gives me, I just have to talk to Matt Towery about one more thing in the Florida gubernatorial race. The name Obama, the presence of Obama, Charlie Crist's embrace of Obama. In the final analysis, will that association with the president hurt Charlie Crist in the Florida gubernatorial election?
Yes, in the sense that a lot of folks who voted for Obama back in the last presidential cycle, they voted for him in 2008. As we know, Florida was a very close contest both times. Obama took it this last time. I think you're going to see a lot of those folks are beginning to leave the Obama camp in terms of supporting him. They feel like it's a failed presidency. They don't want to talk about it. Even I was with some pretty strong Democrats last night at the dinner. They just, when you got to Obama, they just threw their hands up and said, well, we just have to forget that. Now, a lot of those folks will still stick with Charlie Crist because they are Democrats, but for those who are independents, and there's a large percent of voters who are independent in Florida who might have voted for Obama last time, the mention of his name this year is not helping Charlie Crist at all.
Now back to the congressional races, and Katie, as you know, at least one of the ways I got to Congress was at a midterm election 20 years ago with an unpopular Democratic incumbent president by the name of Bill Clinton. Unpopular at that time. He was able to repair that before his re-election campaign. Obama, in the tight races you mentioned in Arizona, and you talked about the specter of Obamacare, is it the same situation in Arizona for those Republican congressional nominees that Matt just pointed out in terms of the Florida gubernatorial race? President Obama puts these Democratic candidates at a disadvantage?
It is. It's completely true. I think we're seeing members of Congress on the Democrat side running away from Obama. They're having to own up to the votes that they've made here in Congress, and that's something that it's really hard to explain to the voters in their district. I think in Florida and some of our congressional races out there, you have Gwen Graham in the Panama City-Tallahassee seat. Behind closed doors, she tells Democrat supporters that she likes Obamacare, that she agrees it's a good thing, and that she thinks it's not going to be an issue. But now she's up on TV running ads saying that she thinks Obamacare needs to be fixed. So this is a real problem for Democrats, and they know it. So you're going to see a lot of mixed messaging. They're struggling with how they're going to get around this issue, how they're going to get around the president, Nancy Pelosi. And I think that's going to be one of the more successful things that we're going to see Republicans do, is messaging on the failures of this president and the failures of this administration.
And yet there is a situation where if you listen to Larry Sabato at the University of Virginia, if you listen to some Republican pollsters, they are saying, Katie, that this expected wave, this Republican wave, has yet to materialize. Now, granted, we don't take anything for granted in campaigns, but is this in fact going to be a big Republican year in terms of Congress?
I think when you're out talking to folks across the country, when you hear the Republican message of less government, more accountability, that's something that's really resonating with people across the country, whether you're in Arizona, Michigan, Florida, California. It's something that people can really relate to. And I think the Democrats, when they're going back into their district and they're trying to explain the failures of this presidency or the failures of Nancy Pelosi's agenda when she was Speaker of the House, I think that's something that voters cannot relate to. And they see that that's the dysfunction that's happening in Washington. So at the end of the day, is this going to be a wave year? I don't know. But I think when you take the Republican message versus the Democrat message, Republicans are going to come out on top every
All right,
time.
we will have to leave it right there. Katie Prill from the NRCC in Washington and Matt Towery checking in from St. Petersburg, Florida. Thank you both.